election was stolen. Okay. You good?
All good. It's running.
Thank you all for coming. I've got like 6 months of topics lined up. So next month we've got a good guest speaker, Joe Martin, who is pretty famous in a very small way.
He's famous in the creationist research.
Yeah, he's written some books.
He's Dr. Joe Martin.
Do you work at ICR? Is that?
Maybe.
No, he travels.
Oh, okay.
So he's like in ministry. Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't he a scientist or something?
Yeah, I think so.
A scientist, right?
He was an atheist.
I know who he is as far as Christianity, but I don't know why his name is doctor in front of it.
Well, he's a dentist, or he was a dentist.
Oh.
And then he went to,
I want to say he was an atheist
Dallas
in the 70s and
yeah. So
became a Christian.
Yes.
Yeah, and so March we're going to have a lady from church, which was going to be February, but we moved her back to March, and she's the witch that, or not, she's not a witch. She was a witch, and she became a Christian, so she'll be giving her testimony in March. April, we'll be doing subliminal messaging, mind control stuff, topic. So that would be interesting. Twilight Zone music. And then May and June, depending on Jack Ring wants to do a discussion. He goes to our church. He wants to do a discussion on the dependability of the Bible. So he asked me to. He asked me, and I said, sure. And then May or June, whichever one he doesn't do it, we'll be watching a movie called The God Who Speaks, I believe. So that's a look ahead, and more ideas I'd love to hear. Today we're talking personality tests, and most of the focus will be on the Enneagram because that's like the big thing these days. But we'll also be, talking about some other things related to how we define ourselves, I guess. So leading us is Dr. Rebecca Hendrick. No.
When did you
I graduated high school. Does that count?
That's your PhD.
I graduated from homeschool.
Public high school diploma.
It was homeschool that I graduated from.
According to
So that's
Facebook, as
something.
homeschoolers, we could get a PhD easily. After answering all the questions, they're like, you're smart enough for a PhD. I'm like, thank you, Byron.
All right. So as Rob said, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the pros and cons of using personality tests. I know kind of the title of this one was How Christians Should View the Enneagram. I'm not really going to answer that question. I just want us to discuss it, and then I'm going to share a little bit of my own. Because I think it's one of those things that falls into a weird gray area, and I think it's great to discuss it, and it's hard to make like a hard and fast rule against it or for it. I am a bit of a personality test enthusiast. I'm not an expert. I have kind of dabbled in all of them. I love psychology since I was a kid, and so it's just something I gravitated toward. I don't want to dwell too long on any one type, and I'm not here to give you a tutorial on any of the types, because I realize not everyone's into that. It may not be your thing. But I think it really speaks to our culture, and I think it's relevant to all of us to kind of have a baseline of what we believe about this, because it's just kind of pervaded our culture a little bit. I am a melancholy INFJ, Enneagram 4, and so my deepest desire is to be like seen and known and understood. My mother here can attest to that, just feeling like the Lone Ranger, misunderstood child growing up. And so seeing these on paper, like reading about my personality type, kind of helped me feel more like somebody understands me, kind of thing. And I think that's why I gravitated toward it. The first time I learned about it was probably in like late 90s, early 2000s. I found a book by Tim LaHaye, who also wrote the Left Behind series, which I've never read, called Why You Act the Way You Do. Apparently Tim LaHaye is also like a psychologist or something in psychology. And it talks about the 4 personalities: sanguine, melancholy, choleric, and phlegmatic. And after that, I just couldn't get enough of it. I also found Kevin Lehman's book about birth order. I recently picked up one of his books, didn't like it at all. With birth order, it's like there's so many exceptions to the rule that there shouldn't even be any rules, kind of thing. And also the 5 love languages, which we may talk a little bit about more later. And you may not think it's like a personality test, but it definitely plays into like, you know, kind of how our how we react to things, how we think about things, and all of that.
Okay, I don't, in your statement, you said 3 different things. I only remember the 4-letter one. So what are the other
Myers.
2? What are the other 2 you were talking about?
Well, we'll kind of break them down too.
Okay.
One of them is just called the 4 personalities. I don't know if there's another.
I think it's called the temperaments.
The temperaments. That's right.
Temperament got me you.
Yes,
Okay.
and there, you know, that goes back to like Plato or Aristotle or something, and so there's probably many different names for it. And then the other one, the numbers are from the Enneagram. If you're like a number,
How
that's
do you spell that?
ENNEAGRAM.
So how would you define what that was? How are you going to get to
I-
heard the term.
I am. It's 9 personality types, and then you usually have a wing, which is one of either the number to the left or the right of you, and it usually goes down to more your core desires or things that you're challenged by in your life. So I'm going to talk about the Enneagram for just a little while. I didn't really discover it until 2020 when I was in lockdown and couldn't go to work for several weeks.
Is that the number 1? Or the...
Yes, the
Okay.
number 1. It was, I kind of started watching some videos on YouTube about it, and they were Christian based. In 2020, I went through like a tremendous amount of personal growth, and the Enneagram didn't help me grow, but what it did is it kind of helped organize it in my thought process, and it helped me kind of put words to what I was going through. And so I don't necessarily give any kind of, anything to the Enneagram that helped me through that year, except that it just kind of helped. It was like an organizing process for being able to explain some of those things. We're going to watch a really quick video. This was actually the video that got me hooked onto learning about the Enneagram.
Which one?
It's the Leanne and Michelle.
Starbucks?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know which one you want, so I got you one of everything.
Turn it up.
Time to get your sign. Gotta keep my share up to. I didn't know which one you'd want, so I got you one of everything. You know what? It's a little bit complicated. I think I'd rather just keep it to myself. And often I'll get 2 of these just to make it till noon. These are my people. That's Steve and Bridget. Why is it gotta be so crooked? And Dripping? watch the chain reaction. Oh, it stopped. It stopped. She just took the free drink. That's okay. I'll go pay for someone else and we'll give it another go. Hang on. What's that? Oh, my favorite coffee? The one I just got you, of course. What's your favorite coffee? I didn't know which one you'd want, so I got you one of everything. Well, I just had the best conversation with Chuck. He's the barista. He's going through a very painful breakup right now. You ask me, Claire doesn't know what she just let go. These aren't for anyone yet. I just like to always have them on hand. You never know. One time I went through the Starbucks drive-thru, and the barista was so helpful I gave him one. This Starbucks right here is the best one in town. The Wi-Fi, so fast. And they have a whole bank of booth seating with the plug-ins right behind your leg. And plenty of plug-ins. So I can plug in my laptop, phone, my iPad, my microphone, camera battery charger, my portable ring light, my lighting kit. And if you look at the geotagging information for Starbucks in this general area, this one gets a bit of a bump on the algorithm because the caliber of social media influencer that frequents this particular Starbucks is just a little higher. I like to kind of be among those people just to kind of up my game a little bit. And imagine that working hard or hardly working, you'll never know. But of course I'm working hard. I always get a flat white. That's my favorite. I cost a little extra, but that's okay because I'm a little extra too. I like to know that the beans have been held and touched by human hands, each one containing a story in its tiny little shell, and that their stories have been freed and soaked in a cheesecloth for 72 hours. And their story is now a part of me. There's a poetry in that. Oh, a bird. When I go to Starbucks, I always take my moleskin journal. I just watch the little bird friends that come and bounce around the concrete. You know, some people call them unwanted guests, foraging for little bits of my vanilla bean scone, but they're part of this environment. They're Starbucks too. And in some ways, aren't we the unwanted guests? Yeah, it's a hot ristretto, 3-shot venti with breve, 4 pumps of caramel, 2 pumps of vanilla. You know what, it's a little bit complicated. I think I'd rather just keep it to myself. That's okay. When I come to Starbucks, I think layers. And I'm not talking about for warmth, it's 78 degrees in here. I'm thinking more like social insulation. I'll show you what I mean. Really, you know, pop that collar so you look like a film noir detective. Nothing says unapproachable like a nice set of AirPods. Try to talk to me, I dare you. On second thought, maybe I'll just take this to go. I didn't think anyone was going to be here. I like to have options when it comes to coffee. I never know if I'm going to be hot or iced. I just like to get all the options and have them in front of me. And that way I know that at some point during the day I'm going to have exactly what I need. It's real sticky. Let's give it a 7 here. There's a lot of cake pop debris. I chose to sit inside today because there's some people on the patio that look a little sketchy. I don't want anybody fishing for my passwords. I have a screen protector. I don't want anyone to see my stuff or steal my information. I always come with my computer fully charged. I will not plug it in any Starbucks. I can accept all the information off my computer. And not happening. I'm trying to get that right to the government. They don't need my information. Okay, so get this, right? So normally, like the last 6 weeks, I've been in a major nitro cold brew kick. I meet this girl named Margot. She just got back from a 3-month stint in Nepal. So rad, on the bucket list now. Anyway, she suggests this off-menu butterbeer frappuccino. Can you say expelliarmus? I gotta get back in there, man. The community table is right. By all means, don't be stingy with the cake pops. Come for the coffee,
Yes.
clear for the pastries. These are my people. That's Steve and Bridget. This is great. Oh, I just have black coffee. Just straight from the spigot, dark roast, black. It's a good idea because they don't have to make it, so you can get in and get out real fast. I usually do mobile order, so it's even faster because the drive-through line is around the block in the morning. and often I'll get 2 of these just to make it till noon. I don't have time to like sprinkle in a little half and half or tap in some Splenda. I want it straight just the way God intended. In fact, I see sweetener as a sign of weakness. It's just how I like it. Filled to the brim. All makes you want to forgive Bridget over there for talking my ear off. I'm here to be your best friend, Bridget. Give me my coffee. You are chatty, Bridget, but you know how to pour a good cup of coffee, so I'm going to let it slide this time. When I was at the pickup window, there was this poor lady who got the wrong drink. It was sweetened, and she hadn't ordered the sweetener, and she said it was okay, and she wasn't going to send it back, but I went ahead and took care of that for her, because everybody's getting their drink right, you know? Okay, that's not what I ordered. But it is good. It's probably better than what I was gonna get anyway. So you know what? Let's just stick with it. I like it. Thank you. See, this is why I usually just get a flat white. Flat white. So difficult to mess up. I mean, the last thing I want is some poor barista back there trying to figure out what a drizzle means to me.
All right, so this may not be your style of humor, but what I liked about them is that they have a series of videos like this, but they put them in different scenarios. But they always, it's the same actress that plays each type as a very stereotyped caricature. They even do like certain mannerisms or an accent or whatever, and it's always the same. So it kind of helped solidify what the numbers meant. And once you know that, then you can kind of build on your understanding of it. And so, let's see here. So my experience with the Enneagram has been pretty basic. Not really much deeper than what you would see on this type of video. And I've seen other comedy sketches that and other YouTubers that do something similar, but never anything where you can really, they kind of play each character the same, and so it's harder to differentiate them. These two ladies are believers, and so I knew that their stuff was always going to be clean as well, G-rated. So the most basic understanding of it was enough for it to be a generally helpful tool. And I really haven't had the desire to get much deeper than that. Sorry if I'm like focusing on my notes. Last time I led it, I told y'all that I have a terrible memory, and I want to make sure I don't forget anything or get off onto a rabbit trail. But I also knew that a lot of people have found it to be somewhat maybe offensive or new age, and that was never my experience with it at all. In fact, the Enneagram symbol hasn't even played into the depth of my knowledge of it. Like, I kind of know what all the lines are, and but I've never, it doesn't really affect what the basic knowledge that I have of it. And then I eventually came across this other video that we're going to watch a little bit of. So the next one.
What is this one about? And so that
All right, friends, we have a fascinating story for you today. I'm here with a former student of mine from the Bioapologetics program who did his doctoral dissertation on the Enneagram and has recently published a book that I've got here with me. It's called The New Age Trojan Horse. And we're going to be asking questions. What is the Enneagram? Should Christians be concerned about this? And, what's the big deal? Isn't it just a personality test? I don't know anybody better to talk about this than my friend. I say former student, but now you're a doctor, so I feel like I should call you Dr. Berg. Congratulations on graduating. But we're super proud of you in our bioapologetics program. You're doing great things. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate time, so let me just start by this. Why did you write a book on the Enneagram of all the topics you could write on and study for a doctoral dissertation?
Well, that's a really great question, and it actually starts like it did with a lot of people. I was just introduced to the Enneagram just as another personality test. I took it, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. You get a number, you get some interesting advice, and honestly, I didn't think much of it. And it wasn't until a year later when someone else, another friend of mine, came to me with the Enneagram, only this time it came with a lot of what I would consider theological beliefs. And I was kind of like taken a little back, because I didn't realize that was part of it. And so I said, hey, do you have a book I could read to learn more about this and where you're getting some of these ideas? And she said, yeah, sure. You can take Christopher Huritz's book, The Sacred Enneagram. It's one of the top books on the theology of the Enneagram that's out there. And so I read it, and as I began to read it, I saw, I think this is preaching a worldview other than a biblical worldview. And so I really kind of went through it. And I talked to my friend about it, and after we both kind of gone through it, she said, yeah, I think you're right. And there were some other things going on there, but she then ended up setting the Enneagram aside because of how different it was from what the Bible was saying. And so, again, didn't think much more beyond that. And then I started to hear more about its prevalence. I saw ministries and other things kind of getting involved in it. And I said, this seems like a big thing. There aren't a whole lot of people talking about it. And for a dissertation, you're looking for something that is useful to people, right? It's useful as well as academically rigorous. And so, I was like, this is something I might be able to do. Like, there's not a lot of research in this yet, so I thought, hey, I might as well jump in. And then I was able to do a wonderful project where we got to go through theology and the New Age movement theology in comparison. And the cool thing is, the stuff we do in the book, you can use for anything.
Yeah, I agree. I've read it carefully. We're going to get into some of the things you mentioned, like does the Enneagram carry a certain worldview? Is it just a personality test? By the way, those of you joining us, we've got a free book giveaway for at the end. We're going to take questions for Dr. Berg, and I'm going to let him pick what he thinks is the best question about the Enneagram. We're going to send you a free apologetics book from the bio team in apologetics. So before we jump into Enneagram, just one question to preface for our audience. You talk about this being a New Age Trojan horse, potentially. Just define really quickly what you mean by New Age so we're on the same page.
Sure. So the New Age is a collection of organizations and theologies that really started to coalesce in the 70s. And this has sort of been prevalent, but it's morphed. It's morphed throughout time. In some ways it's gotten soft, in some ways it's a little bit different. But the core of it is this. It's the belief that in some way, shape, or form, humanity is divine. That's a very key element. It's the belief that there are certain practices or rituals that we can engage in to tap into the spiritual realm and increase our awareness of our own divinity. It shares a lot in common with Gnosticism as well, in that there's a hidden body of knowledge that's only available to a few and can only be mastered by a few. And then if you do master that, you will gain these heightened states of consciousness and divinity.
That's a great, quick summation. It brings us to the Enneagram, which you are concerned carries with it certain New Age ideas. So let's just start with some simple definitions. What is the Enneagram? What is this thing?
All right, this is actually probably one of the most important questions we can ask. And I'm going to answer it saying this. I'm going to quote Christopher Huritz on this. I think it's very important to get exactly what the teachers are saying on this issue. And what you're going to find is that whereas some people assert it's a personality test, take a listen to what Christopher Huritz has to say, and then I just want to ask you back, does this send up any red flags? I'm kind of curious to see what you think. Here's the quote. Christopher Huritz. Often misunderstood as simply a personality tool to describe quirks and traits of people's individuality, the Enneagram goes much further than mere caricatures. The contemporary Enneagram personality illustrates the 9 ways we get lost, but also the 9 ways we can come home to our true self. Put another way, it exposes 9 ways we lie to ourselves about who we think we are, 9 ways we can come clean about those illusions, and 9 ways we can find our way back to God. That's the definition. Any red flags on that one?
Yes, I know that's a rhetorical question, obviously. So, it can be used as a personality test, and it does. But your point is that's not what the Enneagram is. That's not its purpose. The basis for which it... Okay, that's helpful. Now, talk about what it does. People are given these numbers, 1 through 9. What are these numbers meant to represent according to the way the Enneagram was originally designed?
So what's interesting, we actually have to go back sort of and do a little bit of the theology of this, but when you're born, there are some teachers who say that you are essentially deterministically given a number, that the Enneagram energy of the universe sort of imposes this personality upon you. Others say that it's more of a development from your childhood wound or your reaction to your parents when you're very young. But the fascinating thing that people who are looking at the Enneagram from the outside don't often know about it is the personality number that you get is not a positive thing. It's actually the mask you wear. Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's the mask you wear, and you're actually trying to sort of transcend it to some sense in the work that you will do. But it's actually the negative. Yeah, each number is associated with a holy idea and a holy virtue that you now have to strive for. You also have 2 wings, which are the numbers next to your number that influence you. And then in order to actually sort of transcend your number and get that illusion of that mask off, you have to work your way through the paths of integration and disintegration, where you go around the Enneagram symbol, which help you recognize both unhealthy states and positive traits from the other numbers. When you do that, coupled with self-discovery, self-reflection, deep meditation, and some other facets and things as well, you will move up the levels of development, and you will essentially transcend or move past or beyond that false self and uncover your true self. And so that's essentially what the Enneagram is, what it does, and what it's set up to do.
That's not scary at all.
Okay, that podcast is about an hour long, so I just wanted to get to the good stuff there. Sean McDowell is the son of Josh McDowell, and his podcast is pretty interesting, so a good thing to check out. Since watching this, I don't personally feel convicted against using the Enneagram as a personality test. I feel like it falls into like the land of yoga and Harry Potter, if you know what I mean. Like those things that some Christians don't want to touch those things with a 10-foot pole, and that's great. And then some Christians feel like, well, we can approach this with wisdom, gain what we can from it, and, leave behind what doesn't fit what we want. And so, but clearly the Enneagram on using it for that deeper purpose is problematic for sure. There are some really great in-depth ways to study personality without using the Enneagram. So I scaled my focus way back on it since I watched this podcast. I feel like I have the freedom in Christ to continue to use it in kind of a lighthearted way. There's no law against it. But that being said, I can no longer recommend it to people. And I only discuss it with people who already know or have jumped in to it and know about it. So, all right, just really quickly, I wanted to give you insights into personality tests in general that I've come across. Rob's going to share a little bit, and then I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. When I kind of first got into this, I felt like this was so life-changing, like everybody needs this. And I've learned it's really not that important. It's not necessary. The Lord can teach us things without knowing, whether you're introverted or extroverted. I think oftentimes it can become like a crutch for us where we make excuses about our anxieties or things where we don't want to walk in obedience with the Lord, and we blame it on, oh, that's just my personality type. And so I think it just in our culture, we kind of hold that up too high, and it really is not meant to be that way. It can be very self-focused. And we know, like, Jesus was very others-focused. And that kind of taps into something I wanted to touch on briefly. We live in a world where people are cutting out people in their lives that are toxic to them, or, you hear a lot of people talking about self-care and just making sure if anything that's not serving you, like to cut them out of your life. And I recently just had a friend talk to me about that. She was talking with me, I should say, and just saying how that's not who Jesus was. Like, he walked a mile he taught to walk a mile with someone and then walk a second mile with them. If they ask for your coat, you give them your tunic. Like, everything is not about what's best for us and our comfort. And so it's, I think it kind of plays into this because we do sort of live in a culture, and even in the Christian culture of today, we kind of put those things much higher on the shelf than they need to be. Let's see. Another thing that's really problematic about personality tests, and I think most of personality tests are pretty neutral. They can be used, they can be beneficial or harmful. But one of them is if somebody doesn't really know themselves and they feel like they're going to get that from a personality test, chances are it's going to be similar to like people who get on WebMD and they're very suggestible, and whatever disease they happen to be reading about, they think that's what they have. I think sometimes that can be for somebody who just is uncertain about who they are. They feel like they want to pick the coolest one. And that's just not really helpful. I think for these to be beneficial to you, you kind of already need to know yourself pretty well. And it really is just a way to kind of organize those thoughts and not to tell you who you are. Let's see. A lot of the tests are also greatly flawed. Most personality test experts will say, don't take a test, just read the descriptions, because just the way they're worded can just lead you astray. I remember 10 years ago when all those like BuzzFeed tests were the thing. They don't tell you anything about yourself. And sometimes maybe that's your type of thing, but you don't like that particular one, and so you'll say no to it even though you like those types of things. If that makes sense? Let's see. And the last thing is, I think it's really, it can be helpful to find role models with a similar type, or somebody who has similar struggles that you have, and learn from them and how they have overcome certain weaknesses in their lives. I have a friend who has ADHD, and when she spends time with other people who are way beyond her in their journey with that, she's able to learn like how they're able to cope with those struggles and be able to just, use those tricks that have worked for somebody else who maybe has those similar struggles that you think that's all I have to share. Does anyone have any questions about that section? And then we'll move on to your stuff.
I find it interesting to understand other people more than myself.
How others are different.
Right.
When I took the test, it was for more of a, this is your personality, and by the way, this career works well with it. Like, it was more along the lines of what was good to study, what was good career-wise, because we were halfway through a program, and if our, personality didn't actually work with it, and I think it actually did help, because it kind of, when I took it, it was more like a, oh yeah, kind of concept, like, and then you could easily see, okay, this career is going to stink for me, and at least that way you didn't waste 6 years of your college life.
Yeah, it's often used in that context, and then churches will often use it to figure out how to put interns into ministry to figure out what's a good fit for them.
But I find finding a good fit for your personality is not, felt like a pro. It didn't feel like, granted, it was just more of a black and white, and not everything is perfect. And even jobs have more, but it didn't feel like a, let's find 9 ways to become something outside of ourselves. I don't know. I didn't realize they had morphed into something different now.
Do other personality tests, like the Myers-Briggs and stuff, have similar, what do you call it?
Like worldview?
Not worldview, like where they're kind of controversial to Christians?
Well, Myers-Briggs.
Not
is-
as much. So
is Christians. So
Oh, it
that's,
wasn't made by
I
Christians?
think Myers. Isn't it?
I don't know. Later on in this podcast, he does bring up that Dr. Berg talks about other personality tests, and he doesn't find that any of the other ones have the same issues that the Enneagram has, because it's not meant to be a world view or like a belief system. It's really just more psychology.
Like you were saying about the Enneagram being like actually your personality type is actually a negative thing, and you're trying to transcend that. Whereas other actual personality tests, you're just trying to put yourself in a box where this is actually who I am, and then you're generally people that look into their personality type stuff are trying to be more comfortable with who they are, rather than trying to become somebody else.
Sure, yeah.
So that's
Exactly.
weird.
I always saw it as kind of a neutral thing. And as you're reading it, you're like, oh yeah, I do that, kind of.
Do you find, I've never really taken these tests, so I don't really have any experience to draw from, but people who have you ever found that the tests are fluid, or are they very, you take it when you're 19 and they're the same person when you're 45?
Personally, I have found that they have been the same throughout.
Okay.
And they don't even change, even with like personal growth. And I didn't become a believer till I was 30 years old. And so in many ways, I'm not the same person that I was when I was 20.
Right.
As I am now at 40. And so, but essentially I'm still the same person. I still have the same flaws and the same things that I gravitate towards. And really it hasn't changed that much. I feel like maybe more than most people, I've gone through a lot and I've changed a lot in my life, but I'm still me, and so for me personally, I've never seen any dramatic changes through that.
So, the way I feel like they presented the Enneagram is, if you find your personality and that's not what you want to be, you want to change that? Question mark? Is that? Am I hearing that right?
But they don't call them personalities.
Or yeah, whatever.
In that
I feel like that's what the.
It's called Enneagram of Personality.
So it is a personality. Okay, because I
Yeah.
thought he was talking more
The thing
about
is-
these are the masks that you wear.
Yes, I think there's like a million different ways to use the Enneagram, and so it's hard to really answer that question because so many people use it differently, and there's even a million different viewpoints on how it started and what you're supposed to do with it. So it's hard to
It almost
say.
sounded, what he was saying, that what comes out as your personality is what, is what other people see, but that may not even be what's here.
Right.
It's what comes out because you see somebody and you think you should respond in a certain way or whatever, and that's what everyone else sees is our personality. But then you go home and you're by yourself and your thoughts are all different. I mean, it could be, and that's what it sounded like. It's something that helps you realize what you need to break out of.
Well, and they use the word transcend, but I mean, so that gives me the concept of you want it to change. There is a higher place to be in this order of not knowing it very well, so I'm not going to say what it is, but the order in which this test is created, and so you're trying to transcend, get higher.
If you know anything about Scientology, it rings similar to that, where you kind of go through different levels and around. Yes, sir.
Right.
I've only ever experienced the Myers-Briggs, but the way it was taught is very different. I encountered it in high school and then in college. The big key with them is you gotta understand who's providing it.
Yeah.
Because I've actually had mine change, flip-flop, and actually on the same test, because I just was real skeptical. I purposely answered the questions wrong again. Got the same. Like I was trying to get something different. I get the same outcome, and then it flipped. The biggest flaw with them is you got to understand the methodology behind them.
Yeah.
Because all it is a choice tree. So whatever you pick, whoever designed that particular one, they're going to give weight to certain things.
Yeah.
And
That's why the tests
that's not always
themselves
taught.
can be faulty.
Some people will present them as like this is the hard truth.
I guess I got lucky because the way it was presented for us was, this is it, this is what you are probably prone to strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And so it was more along the lines of a positive, and by the way, if you already know that this is a weakness, you might want to work on that. It wasn't
The first time
not
I
a
encountered it
transcending thing, more of a, hey,
was that, and it was just like
Right.
they had you group up with somebody that was opposite of you, and it was just to kind of learn from how different people approach.
right.
Different. It was just more that class had used as a way to group people, and then to ensure there was just a good mix of different types in the group, and that was a lot more informative than.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, this is your personality, it's going to stay that way. It's like, for the most part, I get the same result most of the time. Sometimes I got different ones. I'm like, that's not right. I know myself. But it doesn't address your growth, because as a teenager, you might get pretty close, but then this might be you're a teenager. And it's just, I think as you get older, you start to recognize those patterns.
Yeah.
That one podcast, does it address how, because they talk about how the biggest part of the Enneagram that made us not really preached is the fact that it was designed of, here's these passive knowledge, how to change yourself.
I think it does a little bit more. I haven't read his book, but that seems interesting.
I was just wondering if they
too, but-
addressed what's the biblical perspective, because it's,
Yeah,
I heard
he
about this
definitely
tonight.
goes
It's like,
more in depth as the video goes on, so it's worth looking into.
What's the name of the podcast? Do you know?
It's Sean McDowell, but I can't remember if it has a title.
I was just wondering, because when I saw the subject tonight, I was just thinking about the Bible really doesn't preach different personalities, but it does preach that you identify with Christ, and it's like, because some of these personality tests will be like, okay, you're an introvert, you're an extrovert, okay,
They label
and you can't quite change. And I think when you say, well, we give excuses, well, that's really big. In the culture, it's just like, well, that's just who I am. That's how I'm made.
Right.
And that's not.
Well, I'm sure the disciples were. I mean, Peter was obviously an extrovert, but it didn't mean that Jesus expected all of them to not be Peters when they went out 2 by 2.
Mr. Ring, did you have something?
I just had a question. I always thought that personality was like your traits. Your personality traits were like what you're born with. Like you're a short person or a tall person, or you're, you got blue eyes or brown eyes, or your hair color. Of course, we've changed that now, but I'm talking about your real hair color. And I thought that the variable that you don't change your personality. It's how God made you. But what you do change is your character and your behavior. And am I wrong about personality?
That's a good point.
No, that's
Language, obviously.
That's closer to what I've experienced.
I mean, people try and mask maybe their personality. That's fake.
Yeah.
But to try and control your behavior, is learning how to deal with our humanness, through the grace of God.
And that to me sounds more biblical than needing all this other mumbo jumbo. Even though I'm a big fan of learning all this, I also know we don't need any of that. We need the Holy Spirit, and
But I just wanted to clarify, personality traits, are they something that you're supposed to change, or is that just what God made you?
Well, and
I
there's
always thought that.
the word personality, and then there's the word temperament, which you used. And to me, our temperament is pretty solid. Like that's what you're born with. The personality is kind of what people see, but I don't know. You're right, Jack. The thing with some of these tests and things is that they're self-focused, and so what Scripture teaches us is
I'm a dad.
we're all sinners. So we're all sinners. Then what we need is Jesus, and then when you come to the Lord, we become a new creation. And sometimes that takes over, a lot, including our personality.
If you're a parent, you may notice when you have those babies, within a few months, their personality starts to show. And I've had 4 kids, their personality has remained the same.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But their behavior has changed,
yes.
and their character has developed.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good point.
I was just thinking of Moses, who he wasn't like Charlton Heston.
What?
He was in the Bible. It says he was slow of speech, right? Doesn't it say that? And he was like, God, why are you using me? I'm a terrible speaker. He probably I don't know, might have stuttered or something. But God wanted to use him, and of course he gave him Aaron, who probably was more like Charlton Heston, as far as this, But anyway, I think I just thought of that, where God didn't necessarily change Moses' traits, but he still wanted to use Moses. So,
Yeah, I think the test, you said they're kind of interesting to put some labels and organize, but just realize it's that's about their usefulness, because it shouldn't define your behavior.
It's the Holy Spirit.
Because like the one thing that consistently appears on mine is I'm an introvert. I don't like talking. Yeah, I chose a career talking to tons of people. Watching like I like being the center of attention. I gotta stay in the center of attention. Like it's just that doesn't. I just remember the one psychology class I had where they really nailed it down as like, this is who you are. And that was the one I was like, are you sure? I'm gonna see if I can get something different on this test.
So the next video is on astrology, horoscopes, and a biblical view on that. It's pretty short, so we can discuss that. unless you have more thoughts on the personality
Oh, I can't be
test.
around you. Cancer.
My sign is stop.
All right.
Big yield, sir.
Today's question is, what does the Bible say about astrology and the zodiac? In this video, I'll answer that question from a biblical perspective. Then afterwards, as always, I'll share some helpful resources, so stick around to the end. The Bible has much to say about the stars. Most basic to our understanding of the stars is that God created them. They show his power and majesty. The heavens are God's handiwork. Psalm chapter 8, verse 3 and 19, verse 1. He has all the stars numbered and named. Psalm chapter 147, verse 4. The Bible also teaches that God arranged the stars into recognizable groups that we call constellations. The Bible mentions 3 of these: Orion, the bear, or Ursa Major, and the crooked serpent, most likely Draco. In Job chapter 9, verse 9, chapter 26, verse 13, chapter 38, verses 31 through 32, and Amos chapter 5, verse 8. God is the one who fastens the bands of these constellations. He is the one who brings them forth, each in its season. In Job chapter 38, verse 32, God also points to the Mazzaroth, or usually translated constellations. This is thought by many to be a reference to the 12 constellations of the zodiac. The constellations have been tracked and studied for millennia. The Egyptians and Greeks knew of the zodiac and used it to measure the beginning of spring centuries before Christ. Much has been written of the meaning of the zodiacal constellations, including theories that they comprise an ancient display of God's redemptive plan. For example, the constellation Leo can be seen as a celestial depiction of the line of the tribe of Judah, Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. And Virgo could be a reminder of the virgin who bore Christ. However, the Bible does not indicate any hidden meaning for these or other constellations. The Bible says that stars, along with the sun and moon, were given for signs and seasons. Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. That is, they were meant to mark time for us. They are also signs in the sense of navigational indicators. And all through history, men have used the stars to chart their courses around the globe. God used the stars as an illustration of his promise to give Abraham innumerable seed. Genesis chapter 15, verse 5. Thus, every time Abraham looked up at the night sky, he had a reminder of God's faithfulness and goodness. The final judgment of the earth will be accompanied by astronomical events relating to the stars. Isaiah chapter 13, verses 9 through 10, and Matthew chapter 24, verse 29. Astrology is the interpretation of an assumed influence the stars and planets exert on human destiny. According to astrology, the sign you were born under, for example, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, or Virgo, etc., impacts your destiny. This is a false belief. The royal astrologers of the Babylonian court were put to shame by God's prophet Daniel, Daniel chapter 1, verse 20, and were powerless to interpret the king's dream, Daniel chapter 2, verse 27. God specifies astrologers as among those who will be burned as stubble in God's judgment, Isaiah chapter 47, verses 13 through 14. Astrology as a form of divination is expressly forbidden in Scripture. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 through 14. God forbade the children of Israel to worship or serve the host of heaven. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19. Several times in their history, however, Israel fell into that very sin. 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 16 is one example. Their worship of the stars brought God's judgment each time. The stars should awaken wonder at God's power, wisdom, and infinitude. We should use the stars to keep track of time and place and to remind us of God's faithful, covenant-keeping nature. All the while, we acknowledge the Creator of the heavens. Our wisdom comes from God, not the stars. James chapter 1, verse 5. The Word of God, the Bible, is our guide through life. Psalm chapter 119, verse 105. Want to learn more? Subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Visit gotquestions.org for more great content and check out the details section below.
So, any thoughts on that? I had one thought actually, before I forget. There's a video that, this is Jack Ring over here. I mentioned that you would be leading a discussion in a few months. he showed me a video. You remember that video where the stars singing or making music?
Yeah.
That would be a good one to see at some point. So I don't know much about astrology. Did any of you ever use that at some point in your life?
I did for a while. Not like to tell my future,
We have to
but
confess
in
that.
a similar way. Yeah, in a similar way, like the Enneagram, it's more of I thought the personality trait aspect of it was really interesting, and I was just like, I'm not going to read what the stars have for me tomorrow. Like I don't care about that. But I thought, the personality traits and, basically the equivalent of the Enneagram, I thought that was interesting. And then recently got clear to me, like, no, doesn't matter what you use it for. It has, the roots that it has. It has, like, esoteric roots. And, things that are not God-driven. And so now my friends are like, oh, well. And I just try to, like, shut down the conversation. But I have a lot of friends still involved in it. And it's real common, especially with like girls my age. I don't know why, but
I find it interesting that there's enough of truth of a person of like you can find some of your traits in it, and I think that's like Satan's hook. Mm-hmm. So, I've read them all. I was like, oh, this is interesting, and I can kind of see some of my friends who were born in different things and myself in it, but at the same time. I guess I know Jesus, so I'm like, it's kind of like, okay. But I can also see the other side of people who don't know Jesus who are like, who can end up just like, ooh, and just run with it. Because there's just enough truth.
Yeah, there's just enough truth, and there is kind of like a weird slippery slope between astrology and like tarot, which is now the latest craze. That I've more friends dabbling in fortune telling by cards. I'm like, really? No, like.
But are they Christians?
No.
Okay. So
that the world should not do it, but it's definitely on the rise, which is interesting.
But yeah, it's shocking because it's outright satanic.
Yeah. And I'll see it, pop up here and there, and like, I'm like, no, I'm gonna leave the room. Like, if y'all gonna do this, like, no.
My mom, she's very big into astrology. She's not a Christian, and she'll even like go as far as like the horoscopes every single day. She'll get those little scrolls that they used to like. Remember the little scrolls that you could buy at like the grocery stores? She used to, yeah. I don't know if they still do that, but you could get the little scrolls and everything. Some of us that are older remember them. And then like she'll even plan her days around what the horoscope says on the newspapers.
Yeah.
So she's very big into that. And so having grown up around that, I'm very well versed on it and understand their meanings and what it means. But I'm the same way though. I've broken it down for my mom on how you could have one personality out of every whatever astrological sign that there is, and it's like it just but she still believes in it.
That's probably true too.
Yeah.
I heard a testimony back in the 70s by an ex-witch who became a Christian, and he said now, once he became a Christian, when somebody asked him what his sign was, he said his sign was the blood of Jesus. Let's go.
That's cool.
When you were in your hippie days, were you into that, Jack?
Oh.
Talking to you, Jack.
Are we outing
He was a
or
real
something?
How long ago?
The secret's out, Jack.
Yeah, I was, and one of the coolest things you can say when you meet somebody, especially you want to impress them, was what's your sign? So you start talking about that. But don't want to say too much tonight, but I was involved in all kinds of things like we used to cast the oracle, which was an I Ching thing, and we did all these things. But they're all substitutes, and very poor substitutes. In fact, eventually I saw that they were satanic substitutes for a relationship with God. Because if God is your Father, what else do you need? He's He's the
Amen.
creator of the stars. And Satan is trying so hard in this world to get people to substitute something
Yeah.
but God.
Yeah, I've seen astrology being used to like find friends. That's why I see it in the schools. I like that because somebody kept saying they were Cancer. I'm like, why would you? I didn't know what the signs were.
Why would you say
Yeah,
Why would you
why
want
you say I'm
to?
Cancer? Yeah, they would decide. Some of the kids would decide who they were friends with, or they'd use it as a justification. Oh, that's why I don't get along with you because you're X or you're this or
Right.
Wouldn't the horoscope have predicted COVID if it worked so well? Like couldn't they have told us?
One that I enjoy reading that I think is a joke, but I think it's funny actually, is the Chinese fortune cookies.
Yes.
But I don't think
It's
it's
general that it could apply to anything.
Literally.
It's good or
The year of the rat. You're a rat, you're a lion, you're a this. Yeah. I did find it funny when I worked at the bar, there was a person who was good at horoscopes. And so when they were looking at a fake ID, they'd be like, what is your sign? Because even if you don't like believe in it, 90% of people know.
Know what they're saying.
And it was a good indicator that they did not know their fake ID well enough.
Wow.
I'd be like, you're not coming in. Yes. Okay.
You know, it's funny. I actually remember. I had like at least like one friend I remember was like, "What the heck? They just said that the horoscopes are wrong. Like they're off by like a month or
They
so."
added
And then they just everybody just went to the next month, and they're like, "Oh, now it makes sense."
I always like wondered where did they come from because I was interested in constellations and stuff. And look at that, the constellations like there's they call them the defunct constellations. The different cultures made, and we don't call them that anymore. But I guess these 12 have kind of always been recognized. But there's a bunch out there like some guy like this is what I think that group of stars looks like, and I'm going to call it this. It's like, well, we don't use that anymore because people are like, no, that's not a constellation. You know.
the only one I can find is the Big Dipper. I can't really find any.
And the only one I know
Of
of
course,
is
we live in the
Dipper
city,
and
so it's hard to see.
Yeah.
Dipper, Leo, and Orion.
Uh,
It's just because Leo has the Regulus in it.
I think it has one brighter star.
Yeah,
So it's
it's
easier to find.
Regulus.
And astronomy and astrology are not the same. One letter difference, but one is actual, studying the
Well, they
stars.
get confused.
One is the
Yeah.
And I think they
It's
do that. They do that on purpose for those who are
Yeah.
interested in the stars,
yeah.
and they really want to go. Well, astrology. This is how I kind of first encountered it. Beyond just people saying their signs, it's kind of like the ancient form of astronomy. And then
That's
astronomy is the more
cool.
modern with the scientific, and this is just how the ancient cultures understood the stars and studied them. And
Well, Jen,
The
I'm
science
curious
of
if
it.
I don't know if you're studying this, but the Magi, three wise men, keep the three kings, whatever they were. The Magi, that word it was a study of the stars, and the stars explained, showed them Christ. A king had been born.
Studying the constellations and the stars and the sun and the moon and everything gave birth to a lot of ancient religions had their roots in that. Because, they looked at the heavens, and if they didn't know God, that was the most impressive thing out there, And it absolutely ruled lives, because if the sun didn't shine, bad stuff happened, And so when there was an eclipse, it was scary. And religions were designed around those cycles. And so those are very old, very ancient things. And the 12 signs of the zodiac are very ancient. And so I don't want to get into a whole lengthy explanation of that.
I wonder if those were originally given by, God's people, but they were perverted.
That's how I feel. Because, There was a study done by a Jewish scholar, and he said that the star that the Magi were following was actually the star of Leo, but I guess you could consider it like the line of the tribe of Judah, and it talks about how Jesus is the apple of his eye. So the eye point on the constellation, that was the star that those Magi followed to get to Jesus' birth, which I think is kind of interesting. Because I feel the same way, especially with mythology and stuff, how they kind of separate personalities in these different categories. I feel like it's all one, it's just kind of separated. And at the same time, with different depictions of the different things in the sky, could deal with like half man, half horse, kind of the thing like with Genesis 6. I think that these things could have been on the earth, and they might have worshipped these things, like with the hieroglyphics and stuff, of these Nephilim mating with the humans, and then they make like the great men of old, the men of renown. I think a lot of that ties into it as well, because if these people saw that and then consider it what it is in the stars, I could see how they might have bowed down to these things, or entities, or whatever you want to call them. Kind of a weird take on it.
To answer the question that Anna posed about the Magi, Magi weren't necessarily astrologers, but they were trained in wisdom, and they were probably the best hypothesis is that Daniel was one of the original Magi of the East.
Because wasn't he like the leader of
In Babylon?
all the Babylonian like sorcerers?
He was the wisest man in Babylon.
Yeah,
and
I remember reading
and
that.
he lasted into the Persian kingdom even.
Yeah.
So he was a pretty big deal, and it's possible that he took his Judaistic view of God and continued to teach it, and there was a following of
Amen.
his.
I find it
people
so
that
weird.
feared God. You know, we don't know very much about them. But I want to say something real important about this question, because I think it was Rob's brother, younger brother, was in church one day,
Which
and
one?
he was.
There's 8.
Well,
Wait, are you talking about Josh?
Josh.
Oh, okay, sorry.
He was in church one day, and he was doing the sermon, right? So hadn't done that very much, and he was assigned the difficult task of teaching on the story of the woman taken in adultery. And so he got through this. He was doing a great job. In fact, I still remember his message. It was excellent. He had an anointing. Okay, so and it came to the place where Jesus is writing on the dirt, you know. So he said, I really felt like it was important to know what he wrote. So he said, I started going into commentaries and all these different things. He said, I read like so many things, and every one of them had a little different take on it. And then he said, but I know what Jesus wrote on the dirt. And I was like, okay. I don't know whether it's going to be heresy.
It's going to be good either way.
Yeah.
But here's this young guy, I know what Jesus wrote on the dirt. Paused for a while. He said, nothing we need to know.
It was probably for her only.
Because if we needed to know it,
We
it
would
would
know
be
it.
in the Bible.
Right. We would know it. Yeah.
And that's what I want to say about the star. God doesn't tell us that much about it.
Yeah.
We just have to take what is there and say, wow,
Amen.
God did that. He brought those guys all the way from Mesopotamia to meet a 2-year-old Jesus and give him a bunch of stuff so they could go live in Egypt until he was old enough to come home. Yeah. So, I mean, it's been my constant struggle, and God has really, I think, tried to teach me this. Don't try to say more than God says about things. You know, it's pretty safe to say. One of the best answers you can ever have is, "I don't know."
Yeah.
Anyway.
There's one more on spiritual gifts, unless y'all have any more to say about that, what we were just talking about. This is a funny video. Charles Stanley.
Charles Stanley? This
Yeah,
money.
humor.
Okay,
Yeah.
Charles Stanley does comment.
Yeah, I know.
Well, it's a funny story.
Oh,
Now, so you can have a gift, and there are many different ways you can express it. Now, I want to give you an example so it'll better clarify what we mean by motivational gifts. And then we'll deal with each one of these in the next message. Let's say, for example, that at your house you're having a birthday party. There are 8 people there. And it's a surprise birthday party. And so in this surprise birthday party, you are you want to do something very special for this person. So what you've done is you've done your best to bake them this awesome cake. I mean, it's big. It's got all the candles on it, and you've sort of finished dinner now, and now comes the time of surprise. So you start singing "Happy Birthday to You," and then here comes the cake. And so I don't know who necessarily is bringing this cake. That's not important. The important thing is that here comes the cake, and you're all excited, and what's going to happen? And all of a sudden, bringing it on this beautiful cake plate, stumbles and falls right before you get to the table and smashes the plate. Cake everywhere. Candles burning over here, just a big mess. Now, I want to take these 7 people who are left around that table and show you how each gift will respond. And you're going to see yourself. Now, you watch this. You're going to see yourself. So, get ready. Remember what we said now, that you're going to respond according to your underlying motivational gift. Prophecy is going to say, you should be a little bit clumsy there, aren't you? In other words, they want to correct something. Then the gift of mercy, for example. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It just hurts me that happened. And so they want to eliminate, they're motivated to eliminate embarrassment. The person who's merciful wants to help in any way they can. Then there, for example, is a gift of administration. Here's what gift of administration do. Okay, all right. So you go get the broom, you get the mop, you pick up the pieces, watch the glass, move the chairs back. Let's clean this mess up right now. They're going to be in charge. Administration's going to be in charge. Ruling, administration, whichever word you want to call it. Then, for example, there's a gift of service. Gift of service, that's okay. Listen, you just let me do it. I'll take care of this. Don't worry about it. I'm going to get it all up. Because they want to meet a need. There's a need there. And so the gift of service is going to operate in that fashion. Then there's the gift of giving. The gift of giving says, oh, you know what? I'll buy you another cake plate. Don't worry about that. Just let it go. Don't let that bother at all. We can take care of that. Because they want to meet a particular financial need. And then, for example, there's the gift of teaching. And here's what teaching would say. The reason you dropped the plate. That's exactly right. The reason you dropped the plate. And then exhortation would say, well, next time, maybe you shouldn't bring it in here holding it by the stem, but you should bring it holding like this, so you'd have a good grip on it. Now, what did each person do? They responded out of their motivation. The gift of mercy would never have said, you're a little clumsy. Never say that. The gift of service wouldn't just sit there and watch somebody do something. They're going to be up and at it. The gift of administration would die if he had to just sit there and say nothing. Because that's our motivation. Now, how many of you saw yourself around that table? Come on, put them up. Put them up. Wait a little bit, let me see. Well, we're going to have fun in the next 2 messages, believe me. Because that's the way God made us. He gave us the gift. So, what happens? Can you imagine what would have happened if everybody around that table had the gift of administration? They'd be fighting each other. Or if everybody had the gift of mercy, nobody clean up and just be saying, oh, I'm so sorry. Or if everybody had the gift of giving, maybe see who could give the most and who could give it first to buy. And so what happens? We all respond according to our gift.
You know what verse he was reading?
I want to say, is that Ephesians, Galatians? The list of motivational gifts. Maybe I should have had it. We could
The one of 7 gifts.
read it, but
Probably in the list.
I love that because that's actually biblical. I think the personality test is neutral. You know, you can use it for the good or bad. Horoscopes is obviously wrong, you know, according to Scripture. But spiritual gifts is definitely a biblical concept. And in men's meeting, probably 15 years ago, we went through this series, and it wasn't so much, a lot of people will be like self-reflective, oh, where am I in this, you know? But in each one of these, I saw somebody else. So it's like, it helps you understand other people too. Like, we kind of want everybody to think like we do, but like he said, I think that the function of social interaction would be a mess if everybody thought the same way or was motivated the same way, right? And everybody had the same calling. So I love that. Did any of y'all see yourself in that, like how you would respond?
I think the most important thing he said was that we need the variety. You know, if everyone, and so in the giftings of the Holy Spirit, every body of believers, every local church is given a variety of the gifts, and it's not one is more important than the other. We need all of them, and they all function as a, you know, in his story. Everyone contributed to the situation through their gifting, and so things got taken care of. You know, and that's how they function in the church. Is we have to have all of them, and they're all needed. I love that.
And that's why fellowship is important. Something that's popular these days is kind of this, oh, I just have a relationship with God and I don't go to church, you know, or maybe they had a bad experience in church or whatever, but this is why fellowship is important, because I think God made us a certain way, but we lack certain strengths.